you're looking to dive into topics on how to live a happier, healthier, more fit, and long lifespan, then you've come to the right podcast. Livin the Dream with me, Coach Damian Evans. Together, we will explore the topics on all things health, fitness, and wellness. Together, we will be lifelong learners on this journey to living the ultimate dream. What up, Dream Team? Coach D here, coming at you from beautiful sunny San Diego. And in today's episode, we are going to be discussing a very common piece of advice that we have probably all been told, especially when it comes to dropping our body fat, or as most of us like to say, when we're trying to quote unquote lose weight. There are tons of different strategies and tons of different opinions on the best way to do it. But for those of us who are just starting out or trying to get back to where we once were after a long period of having let ourselves go, we usually get told to eat less food and exercise more. Eat less, move more. It's just as simple as that, right? If we could all just eat less and move more and stop being such lazy gluttons, we would all have six-pack abs and defined arms, right? Well, I'm going to make my case as to why it's just not that simple. And I know we all know that it's not that easy, but a lot of the times we put that blame on ourselves. And while, yes, there is a certain amount of responsibility that we have to take for us to move along our fitness journey, there are also many factors and reasons why our current societal norms and technological advances and just our general human psychology that makes this much less black and white than that. I really believe that education is key, and actually understanding the information is essential. And then having a support in executing what we need to be done, I think it's paramount if we're ever going to overcome this challenge of controlling our body composition and being happy, healthy, fit human beings. So today we're going to talk about, how we eat food and how that food impacts our hormones in our body. And we're going to do a deep dive on insulin as well as the fat cell, and maybe some things that you didn't know about those stubborn little guys hiding in our midsection or in our thighs. And at the very end, as always, give you some tangible takeaways and action items that, in my opinion, are much better pieces of advice and much more helpful rather than just eat less and move more. But before we get to the topic of the day, I want to start by thanking the sponsors of this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Lululemon. Lululemon has some of the best athletic wear for both females and males. I pretty much only wear Lulu in my everyday life and while I'm working. The quality of material and durability and breathability are super perfect for my active life. Another one of our sponsors is Dirt Food. Dirt Food is healing and delicious superfoods made by hand and made with love. Dirt Food was created by a local San Diego friend of mine who was going through her battles with cancer. She was looking to find some cancer-fighting superfoods that would help her defeat the two different types of cancer she had. She created a delicious and healthy superfood granola that she makes by hand in small batches in her kitchen. Visit eatdirtfood.com and use the discount code DIRTYDAMIAN for 10% off your entire purchase. I eat it every single day as a snack, and I get it auto-shipped to my door on a monthly subscription. So eatdirtfood.com, and discount code is DIRTYDAMIEN, no space, discount code for 10% off your entire order. And now, on to the topic of the day. All right, friends, so eat less and move more. Why can't we get this down? If a person looking to lose body fat could be put into solitary confinement with scientists watching you the entire time, with controls and variables all accounted for, then yes, if you eat less energy than you expend, you will lose weight simply by the law of conservation of mass and the law of thermodynamics. However, we are human beings that live in a super crazy world with unimaginable variables when it comes to lifestyle, environment, psychology, and all the unique mentalities of billions of different individuals. We are not lab rats, and we know very little about all the things that there are to learn what really happens with the body and the brain. The more that I research, the more that I realize the vast amount of unexplained and unexplored fitness and nutritional science. It's insane. We've been saying eat less, move more for decades, and it just isn't working. It's the same thing for finances. We could liken this to saving money. All you have to do is save more money than you spend. It's that easy. All we have to do is tell everyone to save more money than they spend, and we will have no more debt in this world. I just figured it out, right? No, wrong. This is not as mathematical as if we were isolated in a laboratory. This is a behavioral and lifestyle issue. And we also have metabolic hormonal battles that we must understand as well. One of the fitness professionals that I follow when it comes to fat cell science and insulin and metabolism is Dr. Benjamin Bikman. And we're going to be talking about him a lot in this episode because he is a genius, I think, when it comes to all the stuff we're about to talk about. And he uses this analogy, and I think it's spot on. Think about it from this scenario. If I invite all of you guys to come to my house, and I have the most delicious, beautiful buffet set up. I have a football-sized field set up of the most exquisite meats and desserts and exotic fruits and vegetables and everything else that you've ever wanted and dreamed of eating. Imagine that scenario, and I said, all right, everyone, you need to come as hungry as possible so you can have as endless amount of food when you get here as you want. You can just eat as much as you want. Now, think personally, what would you do to come as hungry as possible in order to eat as much food as you could? I can almost guarantee you would not eat for maybe the whole day or even some of the day before, and I guarantee you'd work up an appetite by exercising. Do you see the problem here? You're eating less and you're moving more, and this is in order to put yourself in the most hungry state possible to eat as much as possible. Eat less, move more. Does this start to sound like terrible advice when it comes to the topic of getting someone to lose weight? This is the advice that is being given and trying to get someone to change their body composition. But it's also what we would do to make ourselves as hungry as possible. Yikes, that doesn't add up at all. And then think about our environment right now. We have all the food that we could possibly want at our fingertips, and we don't even have to move much to ingest it. I don't care how much willpower you have, how motivated you are, or how much self-control you think you have. Hunger always wins. Instead, wouldn't it be better to concentrate on the quality of food that you put into your body and how your body responds to it, rather than the theoretical amount of food that you put in your body? And to state this a little more scientifically, eat food that nourishes your body but doesn't spike your insulin to a point that becomes detrimental to your body composition goals as well as your health goals. If you can keep your insulin in control, you can gain that metabolic advantage. So this is where I want to shift the topic to insulin and its relationship to fat cells and the cells in our body. Now, I know insulin is a very common hormone that gets thrown around a lot. But for me, when someone used to talk about it, it kind of went right over my head. I'm not going to lie. It doesn't really stick for what it actually is and what it actually does, at least for me. I've really had to watch dozens of videos explaining insulin and read different studies and books on insulin in order to even grasp the general idea of how powerful it really is and what it does. We can use it as a tool to help us get to where we want to be, but we can also have insulin be used against us to create havoc on our health. Here's what I mean. Insulin issues are extremely prevalent in our society, more than we actually know. The issues with obesity, with hypertension, with degenerative diseases, they're all right now being linked to some sort of insulin issue. Insulin issues have been linked to almost every single chronic disease. Long-term chronic disease. They have been linked to almost every non-infectious disease, and then even some infectious diseases. Think COVID-19, and then others like that. I'll say that again. Insulin resistance, to some extent, plays a direct role in every chronic disease. Alzheimer's. It's considered insulin resistance of the brain, where it can't get its need for glucose, and is also referred to as type 3 diabetes. And we see similar problems with blood pressure and hypertension when it comes to insulin. It's forcing the kidneys to retain more salt and water than it wants to excrete. So blood volume and pressure stays high, and that's an issue. The gonads are extremely sensitive to insulin resistance, where in females in particular, in the ovaries where there's too much insulin, it actually inhibits the ovaries to create the proper amount of estrogens. And insulin slows down the process of creating estrogen, which is a direct cause of the polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the most common cause of female infertility. And in males, it is the leading cause of erectile dysfunction. This information comes from one of the smartest guys that I follow, Dr. Bickman. And if you want any of the information on these types of issues, I can send you his info and links. Just hit me up with a message or a comment. And I know all these diseases may be scary to hear about, but if you actually think about it, if insulin-related issues are at the crux of all these different problems, does that mean that if we could somehow figure out insulin in our own body, does that mean that we can help ourselves combat these chronic diseases? I mean, quite possibly, yes. That should be super exciting. Now let's think about our Western society strategy with combating these types of issues. We go in and we sit at the doctor's office where they talk to you for maybe about 15 minutes to try and figure out what is going on with you. They may come to the conclusion that you have some insulin issues. So you walk out of the office with a couple of prescriptions in hand. The problem is these prescription drugs are just addressing the symptoms of the person's conditions. It's as if we had a tree that had this disease and we just keep cutting off these branches. This isn't gonna help. We have to find the root cause and address the root cause. Otherwise, those branches are just gonna keep growing out with this disease. And it is known that lifestyle choices and changes have a much greater impact than supplementing with drugs that control symptoms. We have to find and address the root cause if we want to make an impactful change. So let's have a little deeper dive here on the fat cell and how insulin impacts the fat cell. With this information, not only can we understand how fat cells store and use body fat, we may also be able to improve our overall health and work to combat some of the largest health issues our world is currently dealing with. Now, in the late 90s, there was a study done detailing how fat cells release pro-inflammatory proteins called cytokines. This was an amazing discovery because this actually indicates that fat cells are actually considered more of endocrine cells. Or if we thought about it as a whole group of fat cells, they could really be thought of as an endocrine organ, such as the thyroid gland or adrenal glands or the pancreas. Never have we thought of our fat cells in our body as glands that release things into the body. This is a tissue that is secreting hormones that are influencing cells in other part of the body. This should be really crazy to think about because what do we think about when we think of fat cells? We think of them as just storage units holding this unused energy, but in fact, we are releasing these proteins that impact the body in a number of different ways from these storage depots. And with this information in the early 2000s, Dr. Benjamin Bickman was exploring the link between obesity and diabetes. He wondered why they always seemed to accompany one another. Whether large or small, he found that there was this connection between fat cells and metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. It started to register that fat cells are living, breathing things and not just these stagnant structures. Commonly, we used to look at cells as this bank or storage unit that just sits there. You can deposit from it and you can withdraw from it. And while that is not entirely wrong, you can do those things. It is being discovered that there is much more complexity than that. There are also different kinds of fat as well. White adipose tissue is the most common type of fat found in the human body. And when you look down and you see fat at your midsection around your hips, what you're most likely looking at there is the subcutaneous white adipose tissue. White fat is just underneath the skin. And in Dr. Bickman's research, his team was able to take these different kinds of cells in the body and measure their metabolic activity, or how much energy is required to keep that individual cell alive and functioning. And he says that the white adipose tissue fat cells are by far the lowest metabolically active cells that he has ever measured in his laboratory. So out of all the muscle cells, all the brain cells, the kidney cells, and whatever else you can think of in the body, the white adipose tissue cells use up the least amount of energy, which in the context of fat loss, if you're trying to make your body a calorie burning machine and lose weight, the more white fat you have on your body, well, that's really not what you want. So white adipose tissue is used mainly for just storing energy. And then there's another kind of fat. It's mostly located in your chest cavity, which is called brown adipose tissue, or BAT fat. Its color is dark because of the excess amount of mitochondria in the cell, which, if you've listened to any of the other previous episodes, you know that the more healthy mitochondria that a cell has, the better for energy burning purposes. BAT fat, or brown adipose tissue fat, is concerned with mostly thermoregulation, or in other words, if it had its way, it would do nothing all day but create heat. So if you look both at white and brown fat, they are actually quite the opposite of each other. White wants to store energy and brown wants to use energy. Now here's the crazy thing. Depending on what our lifestyle and nutritional choices are, we can, in a way, shift our white fat to brown fat or brown fat to white fat. And Dr. Bickman's work shows that prolonged high insulin levels brought on from high carbohydrate diets tends to take all of our precious brown fat and shift it to the more metabolically inactive storage units that are the white fat. So said in a different way, constant overconsumption of carbohydrates keeps the insulin levels high in the blood, which in turn fills up all those white adipose tissue storage cells. And that's not a good thing if we want to lose body fat. A little side note here, if you look at the cells of each body part on an individual level, kidney cells actually use up the most energy, but we don't have very many of them. The kidneys aren't that big. The brain is next, but again, not a super large organ in terms of the entire body size. Even though the kidneys and the brain use up more energy per cell, we have so much muscle on our body comparably that muscle is our biggest and most expensive overall tissue, which requires and uses up the most energy to maintain and function. And this right here is why it should be our goal to get more muscle on our body. If our goal is to lose body fat, we can supercharge our results by putting on muscle. So in a perfect body fat losing world, we would want to keep that brown fat that we have, and we would want to build muscle in order to be a calorie burning machine. If we were to think of cells as vehicles on the road, and we really want bad gas mileage vehicles if we're going to be using up all this energy and burning fat. So kidney and brain cells are like the big semi trucks that just guzzle gas. And then brown fat is like a Humvee or a Hummer getting like 4 miles per gallon. And then white fat would be the Priuses of the road. Super energy efficient. Hopefully that analogy kind of makes sense because that's kind of how I think of it in my head. The cells that take up a lot of energy are like gas guzzling machines. And then the white adipose tissue, doesn't use up much energy at all. So if moving on to insulin and how it's related, insulin is a small hormone that is flowing around in our blood right now. It is produced in the pancreas, and unless you're a type 1 diabetic, we are always making it, and it's always present. And in the case of a type 1 diabetic, insulin injections are necessary for survival. So insulin's main effect is to lower blood glucose, or the blood sugar. So when you eat meals rich in carbohydrates, the glucose that is broken down from that carbohydrate, the glucose levels in the blood start to rise. And if the glucose stays too high for too long, it could actually be lethal and could kill a person. We're talking pretty fast here, within a day or so. So as the body registers this elevated blood glucose or blood sugar, it releases insulin in order to get it out of the blood and into the cells of the body. So insulin is like a gatekeeper in a sense that it unlocks the doors of the cells and lets the glucose move from the blood into the cells. Now, this mainly happens in muscle tissues and muscle cells. Muscle is the main consumer of glucose at any point, even at rest. The main reason is muscle has, by mass, the highest single metabolic rate of any organ in the body, And because it uses glucose so readily, it is the main consumer of the blood glucose after we eat a meal. Once insulin has done its job and has safely moved all that extra blood glucose out of the blood and into the cells, insulin then drops back down to normal levels until your next carbohydrate rich meal is ingested. And then the cycle happens all over again. Now, that's insulin's main job. However, it does a little more than just that. We usually think of insulin only working on fat cells or muscle cells. But if what blew my mind is that every single cell in the body is responsive to insulin. Every single cell has this locked door or receptor site that allows insulin, the gatekeeper, to come and unlock that door. So here's the issue. We have been told that we need to be constantly eating in order to keep our quote unquote keep our metabolism up. But what that does is we constantly have insulin being elevated in our body. And even if you're very active, just think about what happens when that insulin is constantly being released every 2 to 3 hours, from the moment you wake up until the moment you turn off that Netflix show at night and go to bed. The way that the body works is it adapts and it bounces back from a stressor. It wants to break itself down just a little bit in order to rebuild. We know this. And insulin is always telling the cells of the body to build, 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 and store. It's anabolic. That means build. Pull in nutrients and make something out of that. Now, we need this process in order to happen for survival. But if those cells are always being told to build and never allowed to break down, they will start to be less and less responsive to insulin's signal. In a sense, they're going to ignore insulin and say that, dude, I'm already maxed out over here. And then the body's going to release more and more insulin just to try to get that signal heard. And that's a huge problem. We need to be anabolic and then catabolic, which is the breakdown, and repeat this process in order for growth. We cannot always be telling the body to build. Eventually, that message will fall on deaf ears. You can't constantly be telling muscles to grow. It's going to become insulin resistant. And that's what that means. If we don't have time for the cell to break down molecules and build them back up better than before, then it's going to have a negative effect. The cells will stop responding to the signal to build, and that's what it means for the cell to become insulin resistant. There must be periods of time where the signal is not being sent. And this is one of the reasons intermittent fasting has exploded in the last few years. The time period that we don't eat is the time that insulin levels can drop. The cells have time to break down and clear out the cellular waste, which is also called cellular autophagy, getting rid of dead and damaged cells, and then allow it to be built back stronger and better. What's crazy is that you could be eating what you think is a really healthy meal, and you go for that gluten-free muffin instead of the Costco-sized poppy seed muffin. But in order for that company to have made that muffin gluten-free, instead of using wheat, which we know will spike insulin levels due to the carbohydrates, the manufacturers use things like tapioca starch, which gram for gram will elevate the insulin levels more than wheat would have. And this happens with tons of different foods. Brown rice, syrup, random things will be put into gluten-free foods in order to make it more like the original food item. So it's not just the Cheetos and the Doritos and the Pepsi and all that stuff that we know is junk for us, but it's also some of the quote-unquote healthy foods that we find at Whole Foods and Jimbos and places that we consider healthy places to buy our groceries. If they are elevating the insulin levels in the blood, then they are having similar effects at the cellular level of overtaxing that cell and moving the cell closer and closer to insulin resistance. Even though it's supposed to be a healthy food, how frustrating is this? It's so hard for us as consumers to navigate this nutrition landscape. We are told that something is healthy for us, and we're told the strategies of eating more often. We're told one thing only to have us told that that one thing is actually not benefiting us at all. It's actually doing the opposite. That's why I always say nutrition is so individualized. We have to do what works for us, for you. You have to do trial and error. And if what you're doing right now is not working, that means that something has to change. even if you feel like you are, quote unquote, eating healthy and doing everything right. These foods that we are constantly eating, whether healthy or not, they are increasing insulin levels and never letting that insulin level drop. So if we can move back to insulin resistance and what that does to each of the cells, knowing that that's probably what a lot of us are doing right now. Insulin resistance is, in Dr. Bickman's opinion, an epidemic, especially in our Western society, but also all around the world. He says that the most common health disorder in the world is insulin resistance. In the US alone, it affects potentially 88% of adults. 88%. And this problem is spreading around the world. Here's the real issue, and kind of hang with me here. If we are constantly spiking glucose, blood sugar, then you're constantly spiking insulin, right? When blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up because it's trying to get all that blood sugar out of the blood. Insulin, however, lags behind. Even when the glucose is gone and in those cells, insulin levels lag and stay behind in the blood a little bit longer. Now, over time, when this happens, insulin starts to lose its power, and more insulin is left hanging out in the blood. Each cell now requires more insulin in order to clear out the same amount of glucose. So the problem arises because our medical system usually only looks at blood glucose levels. And maybe you can start to see where the real issue is here. Over time, it may look like their person has blood glucose under control because it's out of the blood. However, it's only because they have tons more insulin being released in order to make that blood glucose get stored. If we only look at blood glucose levels, you may completely miss the long-term chronic oversaturation of insulin in the body. And here's why we're not catching some of these chronic diseases that are happening until, well, they're way on their way to becoming huge issues in that individual. The best analogy I can think of is if you use credit cards to pay for everything you buy, and you're looking at your bank account, and your bank account seems great. You have all this nice little savings in your bank account, and you're all set. All the while, you have 10 different credit cards about to max out. Once you max out all of your credit cards, all you have is what's in your bank account. But it's already too late. Your bank account cannot minimize the damage that all those credit card debts have accrued over time. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. If we stopped just looking at blood glucose levels and actually started tracking blood insulin levels, we may be able to detect issues that are starting to occur as early as 10 or 15 years earlier than if we were to have gotten these chronic diseases later. Remember all those health issues that I mentioned before: type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, hypertension, even migraine headaches and infertility. What if we had early detection and some way to tell us that we're on the way to those terrible chronic diseases before they are a full-blown serious problem? Once we detect the problem, once the body has become resistant to its own insulin, that the body can no longer keep its glucose in check. And then the blood glucose levels start to rise. Well, it's like trying to catch up on those credit card debts, only they've been maxed out for a long time. Now you're in a really deep hole that's hard to climb out of. Now is when you get diagnosed with those chronic diseases. And then here's where our Western society strategy of dealing with these elevated blood glucose levels comes in. We do anything that we can to drop those blood glucose levels because we think that that's really the issue, including adding more insulin, which is the underlying main cause of all these problems in the first place. That's so scary, right? We give the diabetics more insulin or drugs that can stimulate the pancreas to release more insulin. So we push the insulin levels higher and higher, and sure, that's going to help drop the blood glucose. But hopefully we can start to see what this is doing. It's kicking the can down the road, and it's exacerbating what we should really be trying to gain control of, which is to try and stop these cells in our body from becoming more insulin resistant. Now, I know this is kind of crazy and it sounds like it's all bad stuff. It sounds like the body is always fighting off these chronic diseases. But we have to remember, the body doesn't make mistakes. Everything it does is done out of its desire for survival. It is trying to maintain homeostasis, its baseline. So if we can, in essence, just get out of the way and let the body do its thing, we will be in a much better place health-wise. It's the overconsumption of processed junk food and the fact that we never give our body time to deal with that junk. We just keep consuming. This is where the problems arise. If we can bring this back to the fat cells are the first to become insulin resistant due to the fact that they just get way too big. They just can't store anymore. We keep telling that fat cell to store, store, store. And at a certain point, it says, no more. If I store anymore, I'm going to explode. And that's going to be a really bad thing for you, the body. So it's not going to allow that to happen. Instead, the fat cell starts to leak proteins and fat. And this brings back how the cell is more of an endocrine cell than a storage depot. It is right now releasing its contents because if it doesn't, really bad things can happen in the form of cellular death. And in the process of trying to save itself, it is essentially leaking its disease in the form of inflammation, which is the perfect recipe to make other cells nearby sick. So then we see the muscle cells and the bone cells all start to become insulin resistant. The liver becomes insulin resistant and it increases triglycerides and reducing HDL, making a profile in the blood that is promoting heart disease. The fat cell is the first domino to fall. And once it falls, it starts moving to other tissues in the body. And you can see this cascade of events in health issues start to occur. The fat cell is trying to survive. But in the process, it's bringing all the other cells around it down with it. It's like a drowning swimmer. The fat cell will grab on in the process of drowning and take the cells around it with it. Before we move on to some other solutions that we can bring to eating less and moving more, here are a couple signs and signals that you or someone you know may be insulin resistant. If you find that you're a little bit overweight, if you have a little more fat on your belly than you should, and you have high blood pressure, well, experts say that it's almost a guarantee that you have started down the path of insulin resistance. Excess belly fat and high blood pressure is a bad sign. We can also go beyond that. There are other signs that may be telling you that you're insulin resistant that are actually visible when it comes to your skin. If someone has skin tags, that's a sign of insulin resistant. Typically around your neck or the back of your armpits, at those same areas where the skin folds are, you can actually see rougher, darker skin as well. It's a condition called acanthosis nigricans. It's a hyperpigmentation of the skin. The reason skin tags occur is because that layer of the skin that used to be flat, it's budding out. What's happening there is the insulin is hyperstimulating the cells in that area to create an explosion of growth. So what was once a flat piece of skin is now pushing up and out due to the excess signal of growth from the elevated insulin levels in that area. And in the case of the darker skin, it's from the hyper level of insulin that is stimulating the melanocytes and creates more melanin. And we all know that melanin is the reason that we get more color to our skin. So in those areas, those small areas of darker, rougher skin, it's the overstimulating signal from insulin telling those cells to speed up growth. So those are two really good signs right there. Dr. Bickman says that it's a super smart thing to do to measure your fasting insulin levels. If you ever have the opportunity, that's definitely something you should ask your doctor, not just your blood glucose levels. He says that if you have a fasting insulin of 6 microunits per milliliter or lower, that's a wonderful sign you're good. But if you're over 7 and into the 20s for sure or beyond, that is a sign of a strong insulin resistance. If you are unable to take an insulin test, but you have your blood lipid panels, you can do another test. So a lot of us get our blood lipid panels. Take your triglycerides and divide it by your HDL. And if that's less than 1.5, that's strong evidence that you're good. In contrast, if it's above 1.5, that's a strong evidence that right there you may be starting or are insulin resistant. So now that we understand what insulin resistance is, what it's doing in the body, and how to know if you may be at risk, what can we do now? What can we do to intervene and get us back on track with our health and fitness goals? The two main suggestions that I'm reading about and keep coming up as the top two things that you can get under control is number one, control your stress levels. We have talked about this before in different categories of health and fitness. Stress. But one of the best ways to control your stress levels is getting good quality sleep. Just one night of bad sleep can increase your cortisol levels and your adrenaline levels, which in turn will have terrible effects when it comes to controlling your insulin. And that's just one night. Compare that and compound that over many nights, you're putting all of that stuff that we just talked about with insulin resistance into overdrive. Control your stress levels. Take time throughout the day to breathe. Take time and have a gratitude practice. Take time away from social media and the news, and preferably spend some time in nature. So number one, do what you can do to control your stress levels, mainly by just getting good quality sleep. And then of course, number two, control your insulin levels through diet. Minimize processed carbohydrates and starches. Here's something that I have a really hard time doing myself. They recommend getting most of your carbs and starches from whole fruits and vegetables. I myself eat very few fruits and vegetables, so I definitely need to start putting more importance on that. I know it. They're saying also try not to drink your fruits and vegetables as well. You want to be eating them in order to control what we're looking to. So minimize the shakes, minimize the blender, and maximize the whole foods. And then also prioritize your protein. My favorite macronutrient, protein. Make sure you're getting enough of it. The best sources of protein are whey protein, eggs, any kind of grass-fed, pasture-raised, good quality meat. This is what they're recommending. Anywhere between 0.6 and 1 gram of protein per pound of lean muscle mass on your body. And then lastly, fill all the remaining calories with fat. Fat has no effect on insulin. Protein has a modest effect, but fat has none. The best protein come with fat, and fat helps the body digest and use protein better. So fat and protein are a great combination, and it's more anabolic when they come together. Let the fat be a natural part of your diet. Focus on animal fats and fruit fats. Fruit fats are like coconut and avocado. Try to avoid seed oils like soybean oil or cottonseed oil, canola oil. Avoid that stuff. Soybean oil actually is one of the single most common used fats in the American diet. Even if you don't think you eat it, yes, you most likely do. If you eat processed packaged foods, you're most likely eating soybean oil or another form of it. So fill with animal and fruit fats. Try to stay away from the seed oils. And then lastly, when it comes to your eating time, your eating window, let your body take a break from eating to let those insulin levels come down. So if you eat a high carbohydrate meal, it's okay. But when you start eating back to back to back high carbohydrate meals, that insulin just keeps going up and up and up. You got to pick an eating window, like a 6-hour eating window throughout your day or a 4-hour eating window, whatever it is. And don't worry that much about how much you're eating when it comes to the amount of like calories. I'll get to that in just a second. But focus more on the quality of foods you're eating. What is the macronutrient breakdown of that food that you're eating? Try to focus on that. Do what works best for you and do what feels best for your body. Eat when you're hungry and then stop when you feel satisfied. Then to put a stamp on this whole insulin thing, let's finally discuss why movement is so important. If you know me or if you've followed any of my advice for any amount of time, you'll know how much importance that I put on movement. I seriously believe that movement is life. An object in motion stays in motion. And as soon as you stop moving, that's when the body starts dying, in my opinion. When it comes to insulin, remember, muscle is the main consumer of glucose in the body. Even someone who is insulin resistant, the power of the muscle is that it has a backdoor option to pull glucose in without needing insulin's permission. Let me rephrase that because that is so important. Muscle can help clear glucose out of the blood, even if the muscle cell doesn't want to listen to insulin anymore. So as the muscle starts to contract and relax, it can still pull in dangerous blood sugar independent of anything else. Every time I research muscle, it just keeps getting better and better on producing mind-blowing benefits. Friends, you gotta lift heavy. Muscle is a magic tissue when it comes to your health. And as a byproduct, you experience those aesthetic changes that you're after as well. Build muscle, and it's gonna help us in this process. And Dr. Bickman recommends that if you are insulin resistant, or you think you may be starting to have these issues with blood sugar, or maybe you have even been diagnosed with a chronic disease like type 2 diabetes, he suggests that, contrary to popular belief, resist to have a high carbohydrate meal following exercise. When you exercise, you pull in glucose out of the blood, which in turn tells the body to stop producing insulin, meaning the insulin levels drop after exercise. And that's a huge benefit from exercise, dropping those insulin levels. And this benefit has been shown to continue into the next day. However, if right after you exercise, you eat a ton of carbohydrates, you're going to undo that benefit immediately. So as always, it's just depending on your health and fitness goals. If you're looking for a muscle mass increase, or if you're looking to gain lean muscle mass, then maybe you do have some protein and fat after you eat and after you exercise, I mean. But if your goal is perhaps health or weight loss, maybe you forego that carbohydrate-rich meal for just a few hours to really reap in the benefits that exercise is offering. And this is a little controversial. So if you have any opinions or knowledge on this topic, I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear Dr. Bickman express this much more eloquently than myself, let me know and I can send you his material. So now that we understand how the types of foods that we eat can affect our fat loss goals, when it comes to our macronutrient breakdown like carbs, fats, and proteins, we also understand how hormones like insulin are affected by those macronutrients, mainly the carbohydrates, and how chronic increased insulin in the body can create long-term disease in the body and help sabotage our health and fitness goals. And we understand that those tiny little fat cells may not just be storage depots, but actually start to cause some serious harm when they get too large and full. So let's bring this back to the advice of eat less and move more. While I do believe if we had to simplify it down as much as possible, this advice is actually true. I also believe this advice it just isn't helpful to the average person living in our advanced, crazy society. If we break down this advice and just look at the very first part, eat less. Okay, well, ask yourself this. Do you know how much you're eating right now? Like exactly? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that 99.9% of us are going to answer no to that question. I sure as hell do not know exactly how much I'm eating. So how can we actually know if we are eating less if we never knew how much we were originally eating in the first place? And yes, I can hear some of you already saying right now, I measure my food, I count my calories, I definitely know how much I'm eating. Well, really? Let's just talk about how did foods get assigned those calories? Are you looking at the food labels on the packages? Or are you looking at food textbooks and that tell you how many calories a chicken breast is, and then you're measuring that chicken breast? Are you doing this with all of your food? Do you measure all the way down to the ranch dressing that you put on your salad or the oil that you cook your food with? I mean, if you answered yes to every single one of those questions, I have to ask you this. Is that something that you want to do for the rest of your life? For me, that sounds, well, like torture. If that's something that you would love to do, then, I mean, I'd love to hear from you and maybe get some of your enthusiasm to rub off on me and see what your strategy is. Because, sure, I'm a nerd and I love to know exactly what's going on with my body. I mean, I have injected myself with a continuous glucose monitor that sticks into my skin and is attached to me for a week and a half for fun. And I have tracked my sleep and my steps and my physical activity and even my recovery for years and years. But tracking all of those calories seems like it's way too daunting and time consuming for me. And in my opinion, it's an overkill that could lead to some bad relationships with food. So here's why I think it's not the best use of your time. Food labels are determined by the food manufacturer, and that food manufacturer has a range of calories where they can be plus or minus away from the true calorie of that food. Now, if you know people that are really health conscious, that are looking at these labels and probably would consume a lower calorie food over a high calorie food most of the time, wouldn't you as the food manufacturer be on the conservative side with how many calories you put on the food package? And also, the system that we use to give food their calorie worth is over 100 years old. It's called the Atwater system. And it's the one that tells us that there's 9 calories in a gram of fat, 4 calories in grams of protein, and so on and so forth. But this measures the availability of energy in each category of food, not the digestibility, which is very, very individualized as well. You'll remember from previous podcasts that there's a cost associated with digesting certain foods. Think when I talked about the thermic effect of food. Something that is a protein is going to take more energy to digest than a simple carbohydrate sugary drink. You're going to get more of that sugary drink in your system than that protein as well from digestion. Do we take all of that into account? Are we starting to see why losing weight through tracking calories is really, really challenging? I mean, don't get me wrong. Food labels are good. They're great. They give you an estimate of how many calories are in a certain food, but they have a bit of a flaw. And that flaw is that they fail to take into account cooking as well. So we end up with a system that overestimates the calories in unprocessed foods. So those raw potatoes that you are eating, which no one eats raw potatoes, but if you were, they might not have as many calories as you think. And then our system underestimates the calories in processed foods. So those potato chips probably have a bit more calories than you think you're eating. Plus the fact that you can never eat just one potato chip, and that's a scientific fact. And if we just look at the data, most Americans are eating more processed foods than ever. And we are battling this obesity epidemic. All that data, that it just really adds up to being where we are now. Your body burns calories through food by metabolizing the carbs, the proteins, the fats, and the alcohols into smaller molecules our body can use as energy. But cooking food changes how many calories are digestible. So if we go back to the potatoes, when raw, the sugar molecules in potatoes are too tightly packed for our digestive system to handle. But cooking causes those starches in the potato to gelatinize. That allows us in our body to access that sugar that is stored in the starch, so we get more calories out of the cooked potato than the raw potato. And on top of that, the type of cooking method might change the chemistry of the food as well, whether it's boiled or baked or microwaved. And I know we've heard about celery. Let's talk about celery. Digesting raw food takes work. Eating a raw stalk of celery has about 10 calories total. Let's say 10 calories for a stalk of celery. But the chewing and digesting uses up about half of them. So you end up only getting about 5 calories. I mean, why can't that be the same thing for pizza and cheeseburgers? That would be pretty sweet, right? But the exact number of calories you're getting is affected by way too many factors for those labels to be truly accurate for you. So maybe calories is not the best thing to look at. I mean, if you are someone that can eat the same exact meal every single day, you can see a general idea of where you're at and make changes due to that. But I don't know many people that eat the exact same food every single day. And then let's go on and address the other half of the advice. Move more. We run into the same problem. How many calories are you currently burning? You may have a tracker on you, but if that tracker says you're burning 2,000 calories a day, does that mean that if you track your calories of the food that you're eating and you eat 1,800, that you're going to lose body fat? Well, I mean, maybe, but who knows how accurate that activity tracker really is? Who knows how accurate you are with the calories or the food labels that you're eating with those calories? And then we run into the issue of the body being an adaptation machine. For those of you with jobs where you're on your feet all day, you'll know what I'm talking about here. The first year of that job, you were probably getting max calorie burn from all that walking or standing or whatever activity you're doing during your physical activity job. But 5 years down the road doing the same job, I mean, you can bet your bottom dollar that your body has adapted to becoming more efficient to that specific activity, and you're just not burning as many calories doing that physically active job as you did day one. Same thing with the distance that you run or the weights that you lift. Unless you're constantly changing the stimulus of your activity, it's probably safe to say that your calories have dropped from the first time you ever did that activity. So, what I'm trying to say here is that your calories in your physical activity, well, those things are moving targets, always and forever. Here's where you're probably not going to like my suggestion, but here's what I know you will have the most success if you do this. This is going to be a journey of trial and error. Oh, I know it. It's not easy. Trial and error means that it's going to take a little bit. Maybe you track your calories with MyFitnessPal just to get a general idea of where you are. Think about on the weekends. Do I eat extra on the weekdays? Can I somehow get a baseline of where I am right now? If you can track where you're at for a couple of weeks with your food intake of just a general idea, and you're going to know you're eating different on the weekends and weekdays, most likely, you then can use that data to start making changes. Or maybe you track your activity with a step tracker like Fitbit or iWatch, or my favorite is the Oura Ring. I do believe this is a really, really good idea, just to have a general idea of where you're at and where your starting point is. So now we have the starting point, just a general idea of how many calories you're eating and how many steps you're taking. So you can see intake and outtake, just a general place. So you don't have to be perfect with your tracking. It just has to be something where you know that this is about your average. So if you're eating, let's say 2,000 calories on average for those 2 weeks that you tracked, and your steps are at, let's say, 5,000. So 2,000 calories, 5,000 steps. Well, I know that physical activity can help me with my fat loss goals. So instead of doing all these changes at once, eating less, moving more, how about I just take the next week and I get an average of 6,000 steps instead of 5,000? So I eat the same, I just increase my physical activity just a little bit. And I see how that affects. Am I losing weight? Am I gaining weight? Am I feeling better? Okay. Did I hit that goal? Did I make that a habit? Did I change? Okay, cool. Now I can add another 1,000 steps. I can eat the same. Once you get to a point where you think that, well, I can't move anymore, now maybe you take some of those processed foods that you're eating and you substitute them for whole foods. Does that drop your calorie intake average a little bit? Do you now start to feel better? Little tiny changes like that are going to help you to connect to your body and how you react to certain changes in your life. So I'm going to finish off this episode by listing a few small changes that you can make, but only once you have an idea of about how much you're eating and about how much you're moving. So just get an idea, track some data, and get a baseline of where you're at. You don't have to change anything for the first 2 weeks. Just see where you're at, because you're probably either staying the same and not gaining any weight, or maybe gaining weight a little slowly. So if you can see where you're at and what you're doing to help you stay the same, well, then we can make these tiny changes to go in the direction that we want to go. If you can figure out how much you eat and how much you move in order to not gain a pound, just to stay where you are, then you can really make changes with your food and activity to get your body composition where you want it to be. Your calories and your energy expenditure may not be 100% accurate with your tracking, but you can know what to add or take away to make changes from your own baseline. So here are some takeaway ideas from me and changes you can make once you get that baseline. Here's where it would be nice to get a pen and a paper or take some notes. So number one, every time you eat a meal, walk for 10 minutes afterwards. Not only will this aid in digestion and increase your daily movement, it will also be a great time to reflect. A great time to hopefully be in nature, or at least be outside. And who knows, maybe that 10 minutes can turn into something more. Start small and invest in those small pockets of time after each meal. Just invest that in yourself. This one thing alone could be a huge game changer. I promise you, if you walk for 10 minutes after every meal you eat, you will be successful in your fitness and health goals. Just do this one thing, but I'm going to give you a lot more. So number two, drink more water. I carry a water bottle around with me everywhere I go. You won't see me without one. I am constantly drinking and refilling. And a lot of times when I think I'm hungry, I'm actually not. I'm just really either thirsty or bored. Also, the more you drink, the more that you pee and the more bathroom trips you're going to take. This right here can help increase your movement. This gives you breaks that will help your productivity at work. This also helps the entire body move cellular waste, or as some people like to call it, quote unquote, detoxify the toxins in your body. I call it moving the lymph around your system, but that's for another episode. Drink more water. I guarantee if you drink more water, you're going to see some good health benefits. Number 3, increase your activity before you cut your calories too drastically. Do this in the form of more walking and definitely, if you can, more resistance training, more heavy lifting. I will continue to say this and I'll probably just say it forever, but lift heavy weights, build lean muscle mass if you want to lose body fat. Shoot for 10 to 12,000 steps a day and lift heavy for 3 days a week. I could say so much more on this, but just for the sake of time, I'll leave it at that. Try to increase your daily movement. Try not to be in a sedentary position, and that could be standing. If you're just standing, that's still sedentary. Try not to be in one position for more than an hour at a time. More movement, lift heavy, build muscle, because remember, when that blood glucose is not getting put into the cells, when the cells are not listening to insulin, muscle can help be that backdoor system that helps get it out of the blood. Number 4, eat less processed food. If you don't track any calories, but you just take all the processed food out of your diet, I can guarantee that this change will be super beneficial for you. This is going to be the most challenging one, and for me, it's definitely the most challenging one. I'm someone that likes easy. But if you can start by substituting the most processed foods and beverages that you eat and changing it to whole foods and natural drinks, that's going to be huge. One thing that you can do right now is to just cut out all the soda. Seriously, stop drinking that stuff. If you have to drink anything, drink water. Maybe some coffee in the morning, take all the sugar out of it, maybe coffee, but water. If you can change the liquid that you consume every day just to water, that's going to make a huge difference. And if it makes you drink more water, just infuse some of your water with lemon or lime or cucumber, whatever it is. Just stop with the soda. And I'm even talking about the diet stuff. Knock it out. It's bad for you. It's not even that good. Your taste buds won't even like it if you take it out for a month and then put it back in. If you want to argue with me on this, message me and I'll listen to your side. I definitely will listen to your side of the story, but deep down, you know that I'm right on this one. And when it comes to the food that you eat, find ways to eat food with as little ingredients as possible. Number 5, prioritize protein. If you can eat 0.6 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean muscle mass that you have on your body, so I make it easy for me. I just do 1 gram for every pound that I weigh. But if you are extremely obese, you don't want to go with how much you weigh. You want to go with how much lean body mass you have. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It helps to fill you up, and it takes the most calories to digest as well. It also helps to supply the building blocks and the amino acids to the muscle that you're trying to build with your resistance training. So if I were to put it in for me, I try to get 150 to 200 grams of protein every day. I currently weigh 185, so if I can get 150 to 200 grams of protein every day, then the rest I can fill with fats and carbs. I should be set. If I'm really being honest, alcohol a few nights a week, I put that in my body as well. But it's all about finding balance. So that alcohol is not going to become a problem until you start to binge and you start to go overboard with it. And we all know what that line looks like. So number 5, prioritize protein. That's going to be huge. Number 6, find a support system. Whether it's friends, family, a group on the internet, or a group fitness program. Find a supportive system that you can lean on when times get hard. When you lose all that motivation, which is going to happen, when you encounter obstacles and setbacks, definitely going to happen. One of the most important things with your fitness journey, if not the most important thing, is finding a support system. This is where I really think group fitness programs shine. Even though I know those fitness programs usually tend to have an unhealthy desire with the high intensity workouts. But once you find your people, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Find a support system. And finally, the last tip that I'm going to give here, number 7, when you have successes with your fitness and your health goals, don't treat yourself with food. Treat yourself with rest days and active recovery activities like walks on the beach with friends or massages or relaxing yoga or spa days. Remember, it is in the recovery where you get stronger, leaner, better. Be kind to yourself in every way, in both your successes and your setbacks. But if you can, instead of treating yourself, oh, I was really good this last month, I'm going to go to this fancy restaurant and order all this food, or we're going to have a party and we're going to drink all this alcohol. Instead of treating yourself with food and drinks, treat yourself with fun activities, but maybe even make it relaxing or make it a rest day. That's going to be huge. If you can shift your mindset to, oh, I was really good for a month, now I get this massage, or now I get this spa day for myself. That's a huge, big tip right there. And what we are looking for here is long-term adherence. We want to find a lifestyle of eating and moving that you can maintain for the rest of your life. So if you just start to do something and right away you can tell that you're not going to stick with this for the rest of your life, then that's a clear sign that whatever strategy you're trying to do right now, especially right now, that's not the right thing for you. Who knows? Maybe one day the stuff that you think is crazy right now and that you don't like, maybe that's something that you're going to do consistently later on in life. But it's all about meeting yourself where you're at now. Replacing your bad habits with good habits, building on those habits every single day, and making yourself better today than yesterday. Stacking something that you want to do with a habit that you do already. So that's exactly why walking for 10 minutes after you eat every day. I know you're not going to skip that, but if you can eat and then walk 10 minutes after that, and you can stack that to become a habit, that is so huge. It's going to be a lifelong journey, guys, of trial and error, but that's what makes this fun. And here's the best part about trial and error. You learn a lot more about yourself and who you really are, even though you just started out by trying to lose those few extra pounds. All right, Dream Team, that's it for today. Please share with me any knowledge, thoughts, or questions you may have on today's topic. I'll make sure to answer and discuss on the next episode. You can ask your questions in the comments section or message me on any of the social media platforms. Also, I would be so thankful if you shared this episode with any of your friends or family that may be able to benefit from today's podcast. I would love it if you could do me a solid and screenshot this podcast and share it on your social media platforms, and just write one takeaway, one aha moment that you got from this episode. This will help me know what's really valuable to you, and so I can keep the good information coming. And it also lets your network know if this podcast is worth a listen to them. Thank you so much for listening and learning here with us on the Livin the Dream Podcast. We are so grateful for you being a part of this lifelong learning journey. If you have any topics you'd like to discuss, please let us know in the comments or by messaging me on Instagram at CoachDamien_SD. Be kind to someone today, smile at someone today, and leave every person you come into contact with better than before. Until next time, friends, keep living the dream.